Hey, everybody. Just some things before we start. We have two people here who are wonderful and have mics. We're recording this. We're going to put it on the sites and everything so that it's available. If you have questions, please feel free to wave and point, and I will make sure to get a mic to you throughout the presentation. This is a pretty broad kind of overview of technology and how the internet works. As such, it's only as useful as the questions I get. I know this stuff, and therefore I'm going to miss all the important bits. All the little things that actually make it kind of weird or difficult or confusing, I already had that experience. And so if you do have questions, please stop me. That's what makes it actually a kind of an interesting conversation and worthy of recording. If you have a question that you think isn't worth asking, I'm more than happy to answer it after the fact. Actually, I work right upstairs. But if you ask it here, it'll be recorded for posterity and all that jazz. I'm Seamus. I work at the Open Tech Institute upstairs. And we're going to be talking about how the internet sees you using some graphics and some conversation. So the first thing I want to start with is getting to the internet. We're going to talk all the way about using crazy tools and talking to websites and all of that stuff. But before I go even to talking to the internet, I want to talk a little bit about your phone, your laptop, your anything with a wireless device, and how it's shouting. In fact, I got to learn how to use this thing. There we go. Every device you use that has wireless isn't just talking to the routers around it or to the devices you connect to. It's actually shouting out in this beacon. It looks a lot like a donut, actually, but I can't draw in 3D. Mainly because wireless antennas suck at talking upwards. It's also why if you have a router underneath your desk and you're wondering why you never get good connectivity, even though you're right there, it's because they can't talk up. Well, they can, but just really badly. But so all of these devices have this big bubble around them that's just shouting out everything that they want the world to hear. And so when you're trying to talk to a router, for instance, and you're on your laptop has to have the router in its bubble, and you have to be in the router's bubble. The wireless routers here in the office, you'll notice, are really powerful. Almost all routers you actually talk to are really powerful, and they shoot out this huge beacon, which is why it's so annoying when you're like, I have one bar, why can't I talk to this router? It's because, of course, you can see the router. It's giant, and it's shooting out all this energy, and your phone is this tiny little device just screaming at the top of its lungs trying to talk back, and it can't see it. So that's why 2 or 3 bars, you actually start talking again. You start getting connectivity, even though you can see all these hot spots. So what is your phone and device actually shouting about? It's shouting about a lot of things. The first thing, and the most important thing, is it's shouting out its name, which looks really weird, and we'll get to that. But it's also shouting out every place you've ever connected to a Wi-Fi hotspot. So anytime you said, oh yeah, save this place, because I'm going to go back to the My Little Pony Club, or Murky Coffee, or my psychiatrist's office, or the Lambda 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 house, if you like the Nerds movie. Any place you've ever been, it's shouting, going, hey, are you around? Have we talked before? And to give you an idea about that name again, every device has a unique name. There are 200 Seamuses born every year, and I have a pretty weird name. So that gives you an idea of just how unique that MAC address you use is. That name is actually 2 parts. Every name on your device tells you who made that device. So in this case, this is Apple's vendor manufacturer code. And it's a series of numbers. In fact, actually, you'll notice there's letters here too. They wanted to count all the way up to 16, but they didn't want to use multiple digits, so they just tacked on a bunch of letters on the end. So you get to 10, and they're like, A, B, C, D. And so you actually have this giant number here, including these letters, which identifies the exact wireless chip in your device. And never has there been a single wireless device that has the same name as another. Now, this is stamped on at the factory when they actually make your wireless chip. It doesn't mean you can't change it after the fact, but it is actually stamped onto your chip from the very beginning. And you'll see here Apple has this vendor manufacturer number, which means they have 16+ million possible chips. They actually have a couple more vendor manufacturer numbers that they use, each with its own 16 million chips. So they have 4,462,000,000, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, possible unique IDs for their devices. And this is just Apple. So this gives you an idea of every phone, every computer you ever use to connect to the internet has its own special name. And so these devices are shouting out their name every 15 to 60 seconds, depending on the device. This isn't standardized. One device may shout it out 3 times a second, one may shout it out 20 times a second. But as you walk down the street, it's saying, I was here, here's my name. I was here, here's my name. Please, someone listen to me and connect me to the internet. And that's cool. But sometimes it's not cool. So the Seattle Police Department built a mesh network, which if you know what I do upstairs is I build mesh networks over at OTI. I work on the Commotion project, which we won't actually be talking much about. This is our only little mesh section here. And they built this mesh network in their waterfront area. The reason they built it is they have a bunch of cameras down there. And so they wanted to provide connectivity to all the devices, all the police cars and the like that were in that area, and also provide free connectivity to people who are wandering throughout the streets. And so people were a little concerned because the police department's setting up this giant communication grid in one of the poorest areas of Seattle. And so it covers this entire area of Seattle here, by the way, which if you know Seattle, this map is still probably not very helpful. It's a really tiny snippet, but it's the best I could find. And they look just like this, little tiny boxes on telephone poles. What we found, though, was because a person has this bubble, about 150 to 300 feet. That's for a cell phone, by the way. And that's outdoors, good weather, not a ton of walls and bricks and other devices causing interference. It should actually be noted that Wi-Fi, like radio waves, are the only well-named term in science because they actually work like waves, where if you throw a pebble in the water and another pebble right next to it, they kind of even each other out and kind of ruin the wave. And you don't get a good splashy wave if you, oh my God, John, I'm sorry. John's the AV guy. So they do cancel each other out when you have a bunch of them around each other. So the more Wi-Fi in an area, the worse it becomes. So what Seattle police was doing was they're putting these antennas up, and they're actually watching the shouts of everybody who walked by. All of a sudden, this entire neighborhood was keeping track of everybody who walked by, where they'd been and what they were shouting. Up to 1,000 locations for every MAC address. You're not connected, you're not touching this network in any way. You don't even know it's there. But as you walk through the waterfront, they're going, hey, there's that person we saw shouting yesterday as you walk on by. And so it led to this really interesting thing where they could say, well, this MAC address walked by my telephone pole. And then at this time, they walked by again, and we had a camera that time, so now we know what their face looks like. Now, they're doing a bunch of other stuff, and it actually got temporarily suspended. But that gives you a good idea of why it's so important that your device is shouting all the time. Now, it's also incredibly important because you need to have it shouting to be able to walk into your house at the end of the day and have it automatically connect and your emails to download and everything to work immediately and to jump on and start watching Netflix without having to type in your password again. And so we're going to talk about that right now. But it's also really important to know that these devices shout constantly as we walk around. So before I go on to how we actually use the shouting, Grady, would you pass? You're awesome. You're on it. Lindsay?
I'm just curious then, so when you register your device with your personal name and everything, that's kind of the extra link between then being able to connect the random device number with the person who's walking to all these spots?
Exactly. Now, as we're going to look at here, that MAC address is only used locally. So we never shoot that to Google. We never send that MAC address. We have a better address, because the MAC address is your name. We use what was called an IP address. Sadly, they're both called addresses, which is actually your local address. It would be like 1899 here, which tells people who you're actually connecting to on the internet. But when you do register a device, you are directly connecting it to your name, or its name. Grady, right behind you. Thank you.
So if you were to tell, like in your wireless list of all of the places that you've been in the past, or often I'll say, yes, remember this one. If you were to basically tell it, no, don't remember me, is that a functionality that covers you or kind of makes you invisible?
Well, so I wouldn't. So you're still going to be shouting out your MAC address, most likely. This isn't something that is required or standardized in some way with wireless companies and people who make phones and laptops. So each one will behave a little bit differently. There's a lot of really great, I think they're really interesting. Some others might not. Articles and research studies of what happens when you put your phone in airplane mode, for instance, which should turn all of this off. What happens when you say don't remember an access point, which should turn a lot of this off. But it is kind of one of those roll of the dice, depending on if the guy who wrote the software for that specific phone thought it'd be useful or not for some other purpose that he was thinking of to make you constantly shout out your MAC address. Another reason you might constantly want to shout out your MAC address and the access point name is sometimes you can have an access point that doesn't actually broadcast back. Because just as we're shouting out, the access points are also shouting out, here I am, let's talk, let's get you on the internet as soon as possible. So there's a lot of weird, fun edge cases that geeks like that require you to shout out a lot. And so the geek who made your device probably wanted to make sure that edge case was covered. So it really is kind of a per device thing. Okay. Anything else before we move on?
I just wanted to, what happened with that Seattle case? They suspended it because there were civil liberties groups that were like, what? And were there any, in New York, I got really up in arms about this on the High Line. There are cameras all over the place. On the High Line, there are cameras. Down the street, there are cameras. And by the time you come into the camera's view, by the time you can read that this is a New York City, NYPD camera, then you're already in its view. And I have a huge issue with that. But in this situation where there are even signs up where they were saying like, oh, by the way, this wireless network, and if you connect to it, it means this. And can you give us more details? I'm just fascinated.
Where am I pointing this thing at? Huh? There we go. So let me, I selected everything. That's fun. Okay, there we go. Apparently I'm horrible at this. Keep going. Here we go. So the Seattle Police Department contracted out to Aruba Networks. Aruba does mostly things like, when you go into malls, they do the same technology to see where you shop and what your shopping patterns are so they can keep track of you. They do it in mega marts, like I think Walmart's doing this right now. So Aruba does these kind of networks all the time to track consumers. So the Seattle police hired Aruba, but then wouldn't tell the city hall or the people what the contract stated. In fact, even after City Hall said, hey, come here and give us, we want this data, you work for us, they wouldn't give up the data. So it got leaked. We don't know who leaked the information, but they leaked the whole contract. And that's when this quote actually came out, which says, the software is a location engine that calculates associated and unassociated devices every 30 seconds by default. The last 1,000 historical locations are stored about a specific user, whether they're connected or not. And I believe this is actually a quote about another one of their products that is using the same software platform. So the assumption is this. When this happened, the police chief, as a courtesy, suspended work on this project. So City Hall could talk about it. From the last I heard, and I haven't looked into it in the last week or so, this has actually just happened about a month ago. The last I heard, it was as a courtesy suspended. So we don't actually have, or I don't have, and you should look it up after this and tell me, any knowledge about if this is going to continue going forward, if it's actually going to get shut down. It is literally just paused at the moment. Does that answer your question, Shauna? Yeah. And I don't think there were signs. They were so close about it, they wouldn't let City Hall look at the contract. So let's actually look at what happens when this works correctly. When you act, sorry, Greg.
I was just wondering, if you are connected to a hotspot, does your device still beacon out its name to other hotspots, or is it just saying, I'm with this one until I disconnect?
I believe it is still beaconing out to other hotspots. That's why if your hotspot goes down, you can connect right to another one. I don't know about specific software, though. Again, as I said, it depends on the software that you're using on your phone or on your computer. It's really a hard question to say decisively about each individual device. Also the reason why that number of 150 to 300 feet was such a broad range, because it matters how much energy you put into an antenna and a radio and all of those kind of fun facts.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. That's my boss, everyone. Everything I know. Let's actually look at this working correctly. You'll see up here at the top left, this is just your data. This is what we're focusing on today. So when you actually connect, you shout out that beacon, and you ask for your hotspot by name. In this case, it's hotspot. And the hotspot will shout back that it has found you, you are connected, or you're not connected yet, but you're going to start connecting. And then you'll shout out, yes, here I am, here's my MAC address, as one last final confirmation. And then it will give you back an association ID, which, fun fact, just a part of your MAC address. They're just lazy and only want to use a part of the MAC address. From that point on, you use this association ID to connect to your router. I'm going to keep hitting that thing. And you ask for this IP address that we talked about. Now, and it's going to stop right here because we're going to talk about IP addresses in a second. The interesting thing to note is all of this seems to happen in 5 packets, and these are very, they're literally quotes here. They're spoken. This is a 14 message long interchange. A lot of the things we're going to see today, that we're going to do this kind of visualization of the network a couple times, It's always going to be pretty short compared to the actual verbosity of computers. They love to talk. They love to talk a lot. They send a lot of really small, inane messages over and over again just to check. In fact, every time it talks, it does this back and forth thing to just make sure, hey, you got that? I got that. I sent it. Did you get it? So this is all, when you actually look at the actual standards and the packets, it's much more kind of obscenely verbose. We're going to skip a lot of that today, but I promise you, you're not missing anything important. If anyone who is on the team or knows otherwise mentioned oh, we're missing this one thing, please shout out, because I did try my best to condense this, and if we're missing something that's vital, I would love, that's why I invited you guys. That and because you're awesome. But so yeah, let's talk a little bit about that address. So we know our name now. That's our MAC address, right? That's this number right here that has a bunch of colons in it. It's 6 octets long. We also have this IP address. It's 4 sets of numbers long, and it works just like your home address. It's not geographically based, but if we kind of flub a little bit, it works a lot like this. You have a large region of people. It doesn't have to be the United States. It could be people who work for IBM. And they get this first number. This is like the country you live in. It's actually kind of backwards from the normal way we do addressing. After that, you go over one letter, and any subset of those groups, those people, like California here, an amazing warm state today, gets the next set of numbers. From there, a place like San Francisco, my hometown, best city in the world, would get another smaller set of numbers. And then finally, you end up at your actual router. If any of you guys are connected to Wi-Fi right now, you'll find if you look at your number, you'll have these 3 numbers in the front will all be shared by everyone connecting to the same router that we're on. This last number will uniquely identify you. This is your unique address on the internet right now. This number right here. Routers are kind of selfish. They like to pick number 1. They like number 1 because they're number 1. And actually, if you want to see if you can talk to the router that you're in right now, you can type in your address and change that last number to number 1. You might actually get a little web portal for your wireless router saying, hey, log in and change the settings and see who's on the router right now. In fact, that's a lot of what I do for a living is that little web portal right there on the Commotion team. So let's take that connection we made with the router before. Knowing what we know about what we're doing with the router is getting an address and talking to the internet is actually secured a little bit. Because the fact that we're beaconing out every bit of information about ourselves, where we live on the internet, and what we're doing isn't very secure, especially when you're in a coffee shop, when you're even, I think actually the guest account here isn't secured. You just have to type in a little password. That means everything you say, every email you send, it's all in the clear. It's all plain text. So if I sat here on my computer, which I would never do because it's illegal, where's the camera? You can actually see every little bit of data that's traveling through the network. So there are 2 ways, and sadly they're bad acronyms. I said the only real good term in science and computers is radio waves. One is wired equivalent privacy, which is not equivalent to wired privacy at all. And the other one is Wi-Fi protected access. This set of slides is actually known as never, ever, ever use WEP unless you don't want any security at all. So we're going to briefly cover why this first one, that wired equivalent privacy, it sounds like WEEP, and why WPA is better and why it works. Why you can feel comfortable connecting to your router, why kind of internet security as a whole works. The principles we learn here about WPA are going to keep going as we talk about other security later throughout this presentation. So let's first talk about why WEP sounds like weeping. So the internet and all of its communication is sent in the smallest chunks possible. We call these little packets. And so an email might be 4 or 5 little chunks of data saying, here's the beginning of the email, part 1 of 4, part 2 of 4, part 3 of 4, part 4 of 4. With WEP, it takes about 40,000 of these to have a 50% chance of breaking it. To give you an idea of what that's like, that's about a minute of actively just shooting random data at the device, or it's about a 13-minute YouTube video. So if you watch YouTube for 13 minutes, that's ignoring all the traffic of you shouting back and forth and connecting to your router and sending, give me all these advertisements and all the other stuff. If you just had that video downloading, 13 minutes later, if you're using WEP, someone who is just watching could figure out how to get in and start to actually see your traffic. So we don't like WEP. And you'll notice none of New America's routers or OTI's routers upstairs use WEP. We all use WPA. And the reason we use WPA, or WPA2, which is the second greater, awesomer version, but they're actually both pretty great, so don't worry if you only have WPA1. is that the best method for getting around this is to either hope that the device, the router, or the thing you're connecting to has another flaw, like it's broken some other way, or to just read every single book in the dictionary, or every single word in the dictionary, and that's the wrong button. So there was a cute graphic with them saying aardvark. You missed it. It was great. Also, feel free to stop me at any point, by the way. Oh, hey, Greta. Nice. I'm glad I said that.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, so my question is, when you say with WEP that the observer can see your traffic, what exactly do they see?
Well, so before they break the traffic, right, when it's still encrypted, what they're actually seeing is they're seeing the conversation between you and the device you're talking to has a front part, a lot like the address on an envelope. And they see a bunch of gibberish, which is essentially the conversation itself, the internals of that. Over time, they see this exchange happening back and forth. They can start to figure out what the password that you guys are using with each other is. Once they have the password, they can go back and read everything that was in that old conversation. They can essentially make it plain text again. Can you give her the mic? Sorry.
But is the old conversation like what your computer is saying to the other computer? So it's sort of like all those back and forth messages, or is it also like the contents of your emails and stuff?
Yeah, if WEP is broken, or if any security connection is broken or flawed in some way so that the content can be opened, you are actually opening up the internal, like, actual conversation with the internet itself. The bits about you talking to the router, all that's happening in the clear. And actually, when we get past this slide, a couple slides later, when we start looking at those network visualizers again that we just looked at, all the text up here at the top right, that was all white. When we start to actually secure things in some way or another, I'll turn it all green. So we can actually watch as different parts of the conversation are open. That first conversation with the router when you're not using any security, or when you're using broken WEP, which, to be honest, like that's, you still have to try to break WEP, by the way. Without someone else's tool, I could never break WEP. But like when you are having those conversations, almost all of the conversational parts of it, like here's who I am, here's where I'm going, hey, do you know where this guy lives? Things that we consider metadata is almost always open and in the clear. That, by the way, that's what the NSA is collecting, is all that stuff that's kind of in the clear, like who I am, who I'm talking to, what time I'm talking to them, what language I speak, what my browser looks like, what computer I'm using, what else? Yeah, it's pretty much everything except for the exact thing you're saying.
Sorry, everybody. So is it like what the observer sees is like that metadata interspersed with plain text, like regular language? Is that what it looks like?
If you're looking at the package that's encrypted, you get all that metadata in plain text, and it's actually like this thing, colon, your name, colon, and then your MAC address, your address, colon, your IP address. And we're going to talk a lot about headers in a few slides. But the idea is that all that stuff has to be very clearly written, and it has to be in a standard format so that it can be easily parsed by computers. And then all your actual content, once all that's done, it says beginning person's content, like Greta's stuff here, colon, and then gibberish if you're using encryption. Or if you're not, it's just that raw data. And then it's interspersed over 5 or 6 or 40,000 packets if you're watching a YouTube video. And each packet has that little address stamp on the top. Did I totally miss the point of your question? I did, didn't I?
Can I keep asking questions?
Yeah, this please.
So I'm just trying to think what it looks like to the observer. Like, to me, if you looked at the information that's in a streaming video or something, it wouldn't look like anything when you're just looking at like packets from the outside, right? But like, are you saying that it looks like if somebody sends you an encrypted email or a signed email and it has like their signature and then it has plain text and then it has more like gibberish? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what a YouTube video would look like to an observer, like, because it wouldn't look like the actual content.
No, it would look a lot like this. And pretend you've seen none of this. There we go. So the top part, it wouldn't look like anything like this, and we'll talk in more depth. It would actually be a series of values and then tables and the responses, there would be one of these that would say something along the lines of JavaScript YouTube video beginning. And it would tell you what you're looking at, so that in this case it would be the browser will understand, oh, this is a video, I should play it as a video. If I were looking at those packets individually in like a text editor, like in Word or on my computer, it would look like gibberish. But when you collect enough of them, you go, oh, here's the beginning, here's the first packet and the last packet. Run these as a video. And then all of a sudden, it is a video. It's encoded as a video. It would look as a video. But this is the header. This is the top part. In fact, this is the top part of a geeky social media site I use called GitHub. And so this tells you everything that you need to know. This is actually what I tell the server here. So it's slightly flawed. This isn't exactly the headers you're interested in. These are actually, I think I pulled out everything but the cookies here. But the idea is that you have all these fields and values that let the browser know, or in case the person watching your traffic, the malicious actor know what exactly is they're seeing or they're is below, as well as a number that says this is packet 4 of 300. This is packet 1 of 28.
So maybe if I can just piggyback on that too, and I don't know, Jed, if this is what you were getting to or not, but is there a moment in that stream of information where something comes across and it's like password to open Outlook, :
Yes.
Lisa Guernsey 579. And it's actually just written out there. And then the next is, here's the full content of that email.
Yeah.
And that all of those things are in this stream. It's not that they're kind of hidden under some sort of other code.
Yeah. So this right here, this first number, there it is, user session, and then GH session. These are what we would call my session keys. These are the password to log in as me. There's a program called Firesheep many years back. So we used to not use HTTPS for all the websites. Some people still don't, and we hate them. And HTTPS is basically a secure way of connecting to a server before you exchange data. And so these, what we call session cookies, they're essentially the password to log in as you. So what Firesheep did was say, go sit in a coffee shop, turn on our program, and wait. When someone logs into Facebook, we'll grab their session key out of the air, and you're logged in as whoever's sitting near you in the coffee shop. And then you post fun things on their page. This is why Facebook, getting your account hacked used to happen so often. Like every other day, someone's account would be hacked. Like my Facebook stream was all just 14-year-olds making jokes about people's accounts they hacked. Was because it's so easy to steal this password, this user session, out of the air. Because again, it's all mostly English text being passed around. I think it's almost all ASCII text that the internet uses to use these headers. So that means that you can just say, see everything, all this data that's being, any bubble that, Venn diagrams with my bubble of my computer, if you see the word password or session key or Facebook, print that out to my screen or try to use it to log into Facebook. Steal that top part, the address header, put it on a packet from me and send it and see if we can log in. So it's incredibly easy if you're monitoring this traffic. And all computers do actually is monitor for traffic that says their name and ignore everything else. They still hear it. In fact, there's whole people who are trying to make it easier for computers to ignore other devices because they're hearing all of this and processing it and tossing it away and hearing and tossing and hearing and tossing. But there's the only thing that's stopping them from reading the data that they see being beaconed around them is the fact that they're told to ignore it. And I think next time I do this, and I'll do this again in New America, we'll actually watch some live traffic, and we can definitely do that. That's a very easy thing to do, and we can actually look at some more in-depth data. Cool. Oh, one more? Let's do it.
So what does the stream look like if you are connecting over HTTPS?
Let me show you.
All right.
So before I tell you what the stream looks like, I'm going to tell you how the stream gets actually secured. Because that's important, mainly because I'm going to ignore this stream. We're going to see a lot of secure communication in this presentation. In fact, from this point on, we're going to see a lot of it. It's going to keep happening. And I want to make sure that there's an understanding of why it's secure before we just say, and it is secure. And the reason is because of my favorite word in the entire computer science language, which is nonce. And nonces are the greatest. One, because a nonce is a made-up random word you'd use for a singular purpose. Stolen directly from English. If you want to make kids shut up, you use supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and a spoonful of sugar. If you want to securely connect to another device, You use a one-time number. They use a one-time number. You shout it at each other. And because you entered a shared password when you connected to the hotspot today, when you come into the work and you log on, you type in a password. Because you both share one piece of knowledge, this like password that you have, and then you exchange these random bits of information, you can create a new password without knowing what each other's passwords are. That is only for that one time you connect. So every time I open my laptop to a WPA access point, or when I use HTTPS, and this is used in a lot of these systems, what we actually do is we have this exchange, tons of packets, and in that exchange we create a whole new password. In fact, 2 passwords, one for each of us that the other one doesn't know. So what's cool about that is it means when you use WPA, as opposed to the WEP we were talking about earlier, what you're actually doing is creating a new password every time you talk to that router. Every single time you communicate, you create a new password, which means it's that much harder for someone to monitor your usage of that hotspot. So when I go home and connect to my access point every night, it creates a new password. And so they have to actually like break my password every new time I connect. Makes it incredibly hard to actually break these passwords. So that's why nonces are so awesome and only allowed to be said like nonce. So before we actually show you the nonce thing, I know it's a big concept to put in 2 slides, one with Mary Poppins. Any questions before we go on to actually look at it? Okay. Oh, yeah.
So just to go back over the web, so the weakness is that it's just a simple cipher, and that once you break it, I have to use the microphone. Okay. So you said it was easy to break. I'm assuming it's just a simple cipher, and that once you've broken it, you can basically just go back and read everything, right? So it's like we're passing information. We just shift every letter 5 letters over. Once you've got it, you've got everything.
Exactly. It's just like the notes you passed in 8th grade, where you make up your fake little password, and once you've broken that cipher, you're done. I just kind of want to stay on Mary Poppins. It's like my favorite slide. So we're going to see that exact same communication we saw before with our laptop and our hotspot. It's going to start the same way, our laptop shouting out for the hotspot. And now mind you, it's already been shouting its name and all of that information before it talks to the hotspot. The hotspot then comes back and says, yes, you found me, tag, you're it. And things get a little bit differently. Now we shout our nonce. And nonce is a little bit bigger than this, but this works for now. The hotspot shouts back a different nonce. Again, we're exchanging random numbers. And it also sends this weird chunk of text. We call it an integrity code. This is the second most important part about security. It's not just you have to have a really strong encrypted standard where you know that they could never break it in their life. You actually have to know that you're talking to the right person. In this case, the wireless hotspot. And so authenticating that this is the same conversation, even if you're using your crazy new password, is really important. And so what they're doing when it shouts back that integrity code, that gibberish that it shouted back, is what it's actually done is taken your entire conversation and shoved it into this mathematical function that always produces the same output. If any of you have ever made sausage, if you shove the same meat and things into a sausage grinder in the same way, the sausage is always going to look the same. It probably won't look like that. Hopefully it won't look, don't eat that sausage. But it will always look the same. If you shove a different set of meats and spices and the like, Yeah, that's Ed Central. I did that for you guys because you said you were going to come to this space. This says nothing about the quality of Ed Central. It should not be grinded. Please do not do this with Ed Central or the California Civic Innovation Project. But you'll note the sausages look completely different. Now, mind you, this is really obvious when Ed Central is way blue and they have a lot of really like yellows and greens. The cool thing about the way you do this mathematically is that even if you have 2 messages that look almost identical, 2 pieces of information that are almost identical but by one little piece, unlike a sausage grinder, which grinds from the very beginning to the very end and outputs that whole chunk of content, the meat that you put in it, the way these functions work is they actually run it through multiple times for every new character, new piece of data that it finds. So it creates an entirely different sausage, or in this case, integrity code, if you change one small bit. You leave out one period. You don't put the tab in right. It's going to look dramatically different. And they don't come out as sausages. They come out as that gibberish number we saw before. And so these are actually called one-way hash functions. And I wanted to actually do like hash, like at a diner. but it took forever for me to get like a quarter of one done, so I went with sausages. Either way, unless anyone has any questions, we're going to keep going on and finish the WPA conversation. So we already started it, so I'm not going to make us redo that whole conversation, the 4 packets we did. So we're going to start right at the not shouting, and this time our laptop's nicer about it. And the hotspot responds again with the nonce and also our sausage here, our hash or integrity code, to let the laptop know that this conversation is the correct one. Now this keeps going back and forth for a ton of packets, each time adding the last message into that integrity code and sending it to make sure the entire content, everything they've ever sent, is the same. And once it's done, everything is encrypted. The MAC address request, or the sharing of the MAC address, the association ID, the IP address, all of this is encrypted between the laptop and the client. In fact, actually, the association ID is not encrypted. I realize that's totally wrong. So that little bit right there is not encrypted because that's actually how the laptop and the router talk. Again, it's the 3rd and 4th chunks of that MAC address, A2CD. You can see it right here. That bit is not encrypted. That's actually the part, that header we were talking about, the address section on there. So we've connected to a router. What's up, Grady?
So why does it use the 3rd and 4th bits of the MAC address as opposed to the end?
At some point, some geek somewhere was like, these are the most important bits of the MAC address. They're supposed to ensure randomness because it is the last chunk of the manufacturer's number. So like the Apple has 3 sets of digits, and then your device has 3 sets of digits. So the idea is that those 2 bits of digits will make sure that no 2 devices on the same hotspot are ever going to have the same address, because the last 2 bits of the manufacturer's number ensure that the manufacturer is unique, and then the first 2 ensure that it's the it's the most changing. It's not the most unique digits. It's basically rolling the dice on hoping not too many people buy iPads. But yeah, that's what I do. It's supposed to be guaranteed to be the most unique 2 sets of numbers as opposed to using the whole MAC address. Any more questions before we move on? Because we've got a whirlwind tour coming. This is actually, we're going to start getting, all of a sudden our graph is going to get a lot bigger and real quick because now we're bringing in the internet. And the first thing you need to know about the internet is that no one wants to type in those giant MAC address or IP addresses we talked about before. Even though you have them, I'm sure that probably only, all the geeks I work with here in this room could find their IP address in the next like 30 seconds. Usually what we do when we use the internet is we type in google.com. We don't type in its full-fledged address. And the way that works is through this system we call the domain name system, which is essentially just who do I ask to find out who Google is today. The reason this has become so important recently is that now with the cloud, which is essentially just you can put your website on 80 to 3,000 different computers, you have to be able to find the certain computer that Google is actually today because he could be anywhere. And Google is actually not just one Google on one computer. It's actually Google on like thousands of computers all over the world. So who's the closest Google today? And the way you do this is you ask your router when you're connecting to Google, and you say, where's Google? This is who I want to talk to. And what the router does is it asks these domain name servers where Google is. And the way that those servers get Google's address is every day, and every website all over the world, including newamerica.org, actually has a specific set of 2 different servers it talks to. And every time it changes the address, it goes to these 2 places and says, hey, here's where I am today, just so you know. And in case you go down, here's where I am today, just so you know. To these 2 different servers. We call these content servers or authoritative servers. And so these guys, I know we're getting into the weeds. We'll get back to the fun stuff soon, I promise. These authoritative or content servers, their entire job is just to tell people where Google is. Or in this case, mysite.com, which I looked up yesterday and is actually like a domain name buying site, and I should have changed this to like my website. But yeah, so I do not endorse mysite.com. I don't unendorse them either. I just don't know who they are really. But so these servers' only job is for you to talk to them and say, hey, where is this site today? And so down the line, you ask your router doesn't know, it asks the next computer in line, all the way to mysite.com, which seems like a ton of traffic that doesn't need to happen. Luckily, they're pretty lazy. And so what they do is anytime you ask for a site, you just write down, oh, that's where Google was today. That's what we call your cache You know when you clear your browser cache and your history deletes itself? What it actually is not just the history of the names of the sites, it's also where their address was last time you talked to them. And so that allows you, even if your router doesn't know, to be able to go to Google next time without having to do that whole query of where's Google today and getting all that information back. And so this process actually happens not just for your cache. Your router may, it's optional, have a cache of its own, and then the next server up the line all the way to that authenticated server at the very end. This means that IPs, like, or ISPs, not IPs, ISPs, or newamerica.com, if everyone here goes to newamerica.org every day, the router here at New America may not want to have that request and all that traffic going through its network that it doesn't need, right? We have to spend all that time downloading videos of cats here, right? We work hard. So what it does is it saves that address and says, oh no, here, I got it for you. You don't have to go ask about that. And so let's actually look at how that works. Josh? Great, he's doing all the work here, Andrew.
Thanks. I just wanted to note a little bit about, and stop me if you're going to cover this, but the like how DNS actually finds the servers that's supposed to ask about where it's supposed to go, which is that the top level domains like .com, .net, and all of those, they have their own DNS servers. They're called the roots, or the root DNS servers, of which I think there are only like 9 in the entire internet. I mean, they're actually made up of a whole bunch of different redundant servers, but they form the whole name service root. And so at some point, once you get to like your ISP's DNS server, they just have all of the addresses for those servers hard-coded, and then they go and ask like the .org root, where is New America's name servers, and sort of works its way up from the right-hand side, looking up like where all of the servers are. And all of that is what's eventually cached, so they don't have to go and ask the root all of the time. And the reason for that was that originally DNS was supposed to be this incredibly hierarchical system where you'd have these really long like US and then IL and then something and something. And so it would be very distributed, and that just didn't end up happening because it wasn't very popular. Everyone wanted .com, and so now it's actually really flat, which is why there's only 9 servers that run all of the DNS for the internet.
So if all 9 servers were like bombed out one day,
yeah,
that takes down the internet.
Yeah.
Globally.
Yeah, although it is only by convention that we use those servers. There have been alternate routes that people have stood up before. And like I said, those 9 servers are actually like highly distributed server farms that are not just like one box in somebody's closet, but is actually like a giant set of machines acting as a single server.
Except for .org, which actually is in my closet. It's a weird story. We'll get to that, though. So let us look at the simplified version. Oh, no, we won't. Let's not look at the simplified version yet. Grady, what can I do you for?
So who is it actually that runs the DNS servers, and how are they paid for and maintained?
Sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
Like, who actually is in charge of the DNS servers, and how are they maintained and decisions made?
So it is a series of corporations. And I know ICANN had a big part in figuring out who these organizations were. I think most of them are US-based organizations.
Yeah, I know that .com and maybe .net are run by VeriSign. I forget who runs .org. I mean, it varies. They're not all the same companies. And then there are a whole bunch of other companies that are registries that control like sort of sets of the servers that tell where to find other DNS servers, and so that's who you register with. It's not a formalized, it's all like all of these companies have arrangements between each other that are not, it's not all according to technological standards. It's all kind of like is a shady cabal of different organizations, which is actually how most of the core of the internet is operated.
And it should be pointed out that there's an organization called ICANN, which is the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. They have an ombudsman site. The ombudsman runs their own site and blog. I would read that blog. It is the most tell-all soap opera-y blog you've ever heard about geeks fighting and yelling about things. It's the best. One of them quit a couple years back because he was done with it because you're not listening to the people. It is so juicy and wonderful. So if you actually want to know how this shady cabal works and what total like cattiness happens in the underpinnings of the internet, it is the best blog ever. I love it. So I would highly recommend ICANN's Ombudsman blog, who just handles all the internet trash that happens. I feel like we're not going to even do it justice now because we've gotten the actual full definition of how DNS works. But just to... No, you went way more in depth. I love it. So that first conversation is encrypted, but the instant you leave your hotspot, the instant it passes your message along, even though you have WPA installed, your conversation asking for where newamerica.org is with your IP address, that's all open. Because your hotspot and you made a secure connection with each other. You didn't make a secure connection with the entire internet by using WPA. That's only local. So all of this, by the way, white is unencrypted. It's open, it's clear, it's readable, is in the open. It's just this one last jump, which I forgot to make green in this slide, which is actually encrypted between you and your hotspot. So when you ask, and this is you, by the way, where is newamerica.org in your DNS request, that's all in the open, including your address, the way that you're known now through the internet, which is the address that your router gave you earlier. And so is the response, which, by the way, newamerica.org is not at 42.18.233.65. I made that up. And in fact, I shouldn't have made that up. There's like a whole set of numbers that are just for examples, but they all look alike. So it was totally hard to see on the screen. So don't go there. I mean, go there. I don't know who's that. Probably don't go there. I don't know who that is. But so this is kind of the first important part is that DNS conversation you have with the servers and like, where is this person? That's not encrypted. Even when you use HTTPS, which we're going to cover in a second, to encrypt your internet conversation, it's between you and the person you finally want to talk to. You requesting that person is almost always going to be in the open. And so that changes a lot of the way that you can be secure, or even more importantly, anonymous on the internet, because those requests out to the world saying, I want to go to SeamusTuohy.com, which you should all go to, it's a great site. Those are all open in the clear. It's just that when we start using encryption and start using more secure tools in a minute, those conversations only encrypt the data that you're going to be having between them. Andrew, could you grab Greta and Mike? Trying to help you out, Grady. And make Andrew hate me.
Hi, Seamus. How's it going? Okay, so my question is, when you say they're in the clear or they're out in the open, to whom and how and where? Because it's no longer like the hypothetical person sitting at the coffee shop observing your traffic, right?
So the internet, the global internet, I should have Danielle come up and do this talk actually. She has a way better version than me. Is essentially a series of cables, fiber optic cable, going from your house to the local internet hub. We call it like the last mile device, right? So it's like a giant router that's owned by whoever your ISP is, like Comcast. And then that is strewn through another cable up the line to another router owned by someone, we'll say it's Comcast again. And then from that to a huge router, which is totally not owned by Comcast, for what we call the last mile backbone. And these are giant fiber optic cables that go the entire length of America, under the oceans, and then throughout the rest of the world. This is why in Egypt they had those guys with hatchets who were like diving to cut those cables. Those are literally the backbones of the internet. That's how we talk to sites and send emails throughout the world. So when I say they're open and they're clear, it would be your hotspot router can see everything you send that's in the clear. The router owned by Comcast. And mind you, the path to even my local Comcast is 4 or 5 routers, actually. My neighborhood has one, a couple blocks over has one. If my neighborhood one goes down, they try to reroute my traffic to one the next neighborhood over. And so it's actually a bunch of routers leading up to this backbone, and then all the way to the website I'm going to go to, and then down a bunch of routers to its actual, the server upstairs that holds the website. And so, for instance, in a trip from me to New America, which I live like a 20-minute walk away, there are about 8 routers. 8 devices. The reason I said Comcast is they're the guys who have most of my routers, and so I keep watching them and seeing how they change their traffic and stuff, because I'm a geek. So there are 8 routers between me and New America. So that means, because we're 20 minutes away, the amount of devices you're touching is a lot. And the NSA scandal, one of them was that at the very top level, these big backbones, they were tapping those, which means that since all your traffic is pretty much hitting those backbones, you were getting, that traffic was able to be intercepted. Because if it's traveling along the wire or hitting those routers, it would be in the clear.
So, but they would have to be intercepting the routers, not the wires themselves.
Wires or
right?
the routers. So fiber optic is beams of light. And so what they would do is they would actually split the light beam into 2 light beams. So it would keep traveling down the pipe and then be split into another beam. It's way easier because they work for the government to just go to the AT&T or whatever and connect it right before the router. Or right after the router, probably before the router, because you don't want Comcast stuff mucking with your, data. But if you're a bad guy, or they saw in Europe that was the EU, I think it was, they had a bad actor. It was just some guy who worked at the routing company, who just mirrored all the data for I think it was a bunch of EU muckety mucks, people who were important in political figures. So the routers are the best place to do it because it's already sorting all that data, and the pipe comes, you have to dig holes for the pipe. So they come out of the ground. It's way easier than having to dig a hole and put all your stuff there.
Just one thing to clarify is that in the vast majority of setups I've seen, the actual hotspot is going to, when you go out past the hotspot, the IP address it's telling you is its IP address, not the one assigned to your laptop.
So talking to the internet, there's a thing called natting, which is address translation. Funnily enough, that was Nat who answered that question. And so the idea is that a lot of times what routers do, okay, good, I didn't break it, to make it easier is they actually tell the entire internet their address. You're talking to me here. And so you and all the 20 other people on this router would have the exact same address according to the internet. This is kind of awesome for some sort of pseudonymity. It also is kind of scary for false positives. And this is where surveillance sometimes breaks down, kind of in the theoretical form, is that if you're at a coffee shop and you're suspicious because you throw a lot of protests against meatloaf, because it's the devil, and someone else at the hotspot is actually a real solid terrorist who's doing bad things and looks up the recipe for a bomb, and all your traffic is being captured. Without some of the techniques we're going to talk about in a minute about the fingerprints that your browsers leave behind and cookies and the like, if you're both using a somewhat anonymized device, all of a sudden it lumps you into the same category. So it's very important to note that, yes, a lot of routers, and even ISPs sometimes, will do this thing called natting, where they'll say the address that you're talking to is just me for dozens or hundreds of people. It is kind of this fun double-edged sword, which I was going to avoid entirely, so thanks for bringing that up.
So if it's using network address translation, and your hotspot sends out a request to Google, and the request comes back, the answer comes back with the router's IP address, how does it know which associated client to actually send the data to?
I'm going to answer that with sockets, ports, and stop it. No, the routers have complex ways of figuring out what traffic, what streams of traffic it's dealing with. So does your computer, actually. It's very good at keeping track of single connections to the internet. And so the router is doing a much more kind of complex version of that. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this because I do want to make sure that we get through the whole presentation. Sorry to totally avoid your question. So we now know who we're talking to after an hour. No, so we're now, yeah, I did it right. So now let's look at actually, we have the address, we know who we're talking to, and we want to actually talk to newamerica.net because that's who pays me. Also because it's a great site. You guys should all go there. Wonderfully built, beautiful. And so the conversation happens very similar to that DNS conversation we had before. We say, New America, at this address, I'm an English-speaking Mac user running Chrome, and can I have your site? And then it gets passed along. Hey, this person wants your site. Here's his address. The ISP, which is a series of computers. Hey, there's an English-speaking Mac user. He's using Chrome. He wants your site. The reason it does this, by the way, is so that it knows to send you the right site, because they have multiple sites to send, like for tablets. It then sends you back the website and that cookie we talked about before, which we're going to actually go in depth on right now. It says, hey, here's the website, and here's some little bits of information so we can keep track of you. And so that gets sent all the way back to you. And I think that's the end of this bit. Yeah, it is. So let's talk about.
So when you encounter, and these are usually old websites, but a site that says like only compatible with Internet Explorer, we might have one of those here at New America. Is that what happens there? Is that like it tells you that? Are you about to explain this? Did I totally?
I'm going to do it right now.
All right, I'm going to just let you go back to that then. Good work, Seamus.
Thank you. So websites use, when you request anything on the internet, and actually when you request anything using a lot of things like email, in that header you send, you'll send what we call a user agent string. And that's basically just a fingerprint of your device. What I mean by that is it tells the program, or whoever's talking to, here's the application I'm using to view this, using Internet Explorer, for instance. And I'm also using this browser. Well, that's the application. If the application isn't a browser, it'll tell you the type of browser. It'll tell you the operating system it's on in case it isn't compatible with the website, and also any extensions you have in the browser that may muck with the experience. Right? This is all about giving you a good browser experience. Now, I have 3 here. I have Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer. And I'm going to look at these really quickly just to show you why this is such a ridiculous system these days. Chrome is a Mozilla product, though no, it's a Google product. And it's running on Windows, but it's also Chrome, and it's also Safari, which is weird because it's totally not any of those. Well, it's Chrome. Then Mozilla is Mozilla, and that's great, but Internet Explorer is also Mozilla, which is totally not right. That's weird. Oh, and it's untrusted too, which is totally truthful. So what happened was back in the day when the internet was new, like 20 years ago, they actually, every time a new feature came out, people would build their website for that feature and say, oh, well, only Firefox has this, so you have to be Mozilla. Or only Safari has this, so I have to use Safari. And what happened was browsers started appending onto themselves the names of other browser types that they supported, because it was too hard to get everyone to change their websites when I could just change it in my browser. And so over time, user agent strings are a complete mess, pretty much useless, don't really help at all, except they're really great for getting a fingerprint of your browser, so that when you're behind that NATed device that Nat was talking about, you actually have your specific operating system, your specific browser, the language you speak. That's part of that header that we send along. You also tell them any extensions you have installed and what any other applications you're using to use the internet. So all of a sudden, these are these little bits of information about you that you append to everything you send, just in case a website might not support JavaScript. So if we go back and look at that packet again, all of that is sitting over here in that header. And this is what a header looks like. This is actually what most of your data looks like when you're not securing it. It's a postcard. It's all in the open. You have your data here, and you have your header here. It's not as pretty, obviously. There's no cool stamp. And it has all those cookies. It also has the language and that user agent string we just covered, and your address, of course. And then here are those cookies, and I realize this is totally small. So I'm gonna read these to you just so you get an idea. This is a social networking site for geeks where we share code. And in this little header, when it talks to me, I send it from my computer, my user session string and my GitHub session string, the name of the program, to say, here's who I am, I've been using your program, here's where I am, I saved this thing, I'm on this person's page, I just did this other thing, so make sure you show it in my feed. Much like Facebook would ask you that you're this person at this time and you've looked at this video. It has this really fun one called spy user, which is the last user I looked at, which is just totally messed up that they keep track of that and send it in every packet I send. Seamus has been spying on, sadly, I'm narcissistic, so that's actually my name there. It talks to some unique identifiers about myself. And finally, this really fun one down here, which are these strings that I keep that are about me that I send to Google Analytics. So Google provides for free to a bunch of websites this tool called Analytics. It's great because it says, here's where the user came from, here's where they've been, here's their individual ID. You can track how often they come to your site, and we'll do all the work for you. And so every time you talk to a site that has this, which is most sites on the internet, you have a little unique fingerprint, which I've changed here, by the way, in case anyone wants to log in as me. All this information is falsified. Yeah, I see you guys. Everyone on this side of the room. And so it has things like where I came from, who I am uniquely on the internet, what my last site was viewed as, what link took me to this page, all this information that creates a really long-term view of me on the internet without even being on Google. It's a thing I store on my computer and just kind of throw up every time someone asks for it. Some of these are called super cookies. And if you're logged into Google, there's all sorts of other fun super cookies they have. I wasn't logged into Google at the time. So yeah, so that's the header information. Is not just who I'm talking to, when I'm talking to them, what I want from you. It's also a bunch of information that I store, the cookies, when you clear out your cookies on your computer, that are little tidbits of information to make my user browsing experience better. Oh, wait, can we get a mic?
Oh, thanks. I'm just struggling to keep up here. So this is a packet of information that is going to be sent from my personal laptop to any website I visit, like NewYorkTimes.com or TysonFoods.com.
Yes.
And their server will have this information, and anybody who can surveil the routers or cables has the information.
Yes.
Okay.
Why won't you click? Aw. I think I broke it. I may have broken it. Anyways, so we'll ignore that I broke it. Yes, the idea is that when you send any information to any site, that site can tell you, when you send me your request, make sure you give me these other things as well. And your computer, your browser itself, might also just send some other information that it always sends. Your language that you speak is one of those. So if you have internationalization or translation on your website, I can send you the correct language. It tells them what kind of browser, in case something is weird in your browser that other browsers support but your browser doesn't. And then any information it asks for. So these Google super cookies, they basically tell the websites, oh, if you use our tool, you can just request this thing from the browser and it'll give it to you. And we'll use that to tell you what that person's doing on the internet and where they came to your site from and where they went from your site and how long they were there. Yeah. And we covered this, I think. Yeah. So let's actually get secure. We're there. We're starting to actually be secure here. And so any questions about cookies and headers and that kind of fun stuff, we're getting out of packets almost entirely now. So.
Sorry. You said it mentioned browser extensions. So if you downloaded for Firefox, if you download Firesheep, would your browser announce that to every website that you're visiting?
I believe it's there's a way to append an extension onto a browser, like a user agent string. I don't think every extension necessarily appends its identity onto the agent string. I haven't done a ton of how that appending happens, research. I just captured some packets for myself, and so those are not my computer, by the way. Again, falsified data. I went on the internet and found a Windows machine. But yeah, the answer is I don't know. Exactly. No, so we're going to start talking about securing your connection the same way you did with your router to a website using HTTPS right here. A couple things. I am not going to show that handshake again that we did before where we sent the nonces and we did that little dance because it takes forever and you guys have been being so awesome and patient and letting me babble at you for so long. So we're going to skip that part, but I promise you it happens. In fact, it's the first thing that happens. Once you're about to start that connection, you make a very similar handshake process, sending nonces, creating a secured connection with this device, the HTTPS server. And secondly, if you want to use this really cool encryption tool, it's somewhat complex to do. What you want to do is append an S to the HTTP when you request a site. That's it. I was just kidding. It's really simple to do this, to check if a site has HTTPS. There's also a group called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, and they make a browser extension called HTTPS Everywhere. I highly recommend it. Because what it does is it says anytime that you could use this, that we've seen this site use HTTPS, we'll try to append it and just redirect you directly to that site, which means you don't have to go around appending S's to everything. It makes it a much easier process, and it exists for a ton of browsers. So I highly recommend doing that if this is of interest to you. But let us actually look at what HTTPS looks like. So you remember that past this hotspot here in the earlier conversation, this whole link between the hotspot and New America, essentially the entire internet, could see all your content. After that handshake, which I don't show here, all of a sudden that content is gone. Well, it's not gone, it's just encrypted. Mind you, the address that the hotspot announces is still out in the open. The header information, a lot of it is still out in the open. The user agent string and there's levels of header information, including cookies and that sort of stuff. A lot of that is actually encrypted. But the address, like where it's going and where it's coming from, you obviously can't send packets on the internet without knowing where you're going, so that is one unencrypted bit. This is where we start to get kind of in the weeds about packet structure, and so I'm going to try to avoid that. Just to give you an idea that when you use HTTPS, what you're doing is you're saying, I want my data, the content of my communication with this source, to be encrypted and hidden. Now, mind you, the name, as we talked about earlier, that's almost never going to be shouted out to the internet. They don't use that for addressing on the internet. No one needs your MAC address. So it pretty much stops at that hotspot, whoever you're directly connecting to, as a unique identifier for your device among other devices, so that you can kind of differentiate who you're talking to. So we've gotten secure. Let's get way secure. This is what we call a VPN or a proxy. There's a lot of text up here. Most of it's a joke. But the idea is that one last bit of information that we didn't have secured before, which was the address we're talking from, a virtual private network or a proxy system does what it sounds like it does. It proxies your identity. It lets you use someone else to pretend that they're you. You can get these for as low as like $5. You can get them internationally. You can get them nationally. And what it does is it actually creates, I think my clickery thing's broken. John, is there another clicker thing I can use? Oh, no, I just selected everything. Wait, I got it. I just had the mouse outside the screen. I apologize. It turns out I have a little mouse too. Hey. So the reason we liked HTTPS was that it actually took our data, which is all ones and zeros, because that's the best way to send data apparently, and it wraps it in a sheath. It encrypts it. And all encryption does is it makes so you can't read the data inside of it. Now the cool thing about VPNs, virtual private networks, and proxies is they take that already wrapped chunk of data, because we're all using HTTPS now, right? We went to Seamus' presentation. We're totally stoked all the time, everywhere. And it wraps it in another layer of encryption. So what you've done is you've taken already existing gibberish and made it gibberisher. Gibberish. Anyways, it's very, very encrypted. And not only that, it becomes even cooler is that you over here are going to connect in this secure encrypted pipe to the person who you paid $5 a month, or in my case, my work computer, in this secure pipe, and then it will then connect to the thing you want to connect to. And it won't just connect to the thing you want to connect to as you. It'll actually change who it's connecting from. Now, it won't change your cookies, because it can't fake cookies for you. It won't change if you log into Google. It's still going to know that you're logged into Google, or Google would hate these. Everyone would. It sends all the content the same, but it changes the address it comes from. So when you're using another type of secure communication with the website, like if you're using Google Mail and HTTPS, your connection with Google Mail will be secure, and only Google will know that it's you who's using Google. Google and the NSA now, apparently, will know that it's you who's using Google. And so it adds this layer of kind of pseudo anonymity. I can never say that word, but I say it all the time. And what's cool about this is that it creates kind of a not temporality. Where is it when you're not in the space you're at? It removes you from your locality. It pushes you somewhere else, wherever your VPN is, and does create a sustained connection there. So, for instance, I used to have one in Iceland, so Seamus was always in Iceland. So it's still your data, it's still your traffic, your usage patterns are the same, but it's coming from Iceland. And it's secured between you and Iceland. Now, I used a big VPN farm, because that's usually who sells them. So what I would do is I'd be one of hundreds of people using this giant set of computers, and coming out of it would be hundreds of streams of data going all over the world. So that's why I say, again, it's pseudo-anonymity. You're not fully anonymous. You're still connecting directly. There's a connection between you and your server over there in Iceland, or here there's good ones in France as well. And then out from there are a bunch of connections of all the people who are using them. So for instance, almost every day, everywhere I go, I'm at work, because that's where my VPN is today, is I use the one here at work. So before we go into look at a VPN, it's, again, one of those fun, complex topics. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple. One is just to, this has been super helpful on so many levels. And I just want to make sure that that very last point that I'm understanding what you said there, which is that, because I'd always assumed that proxies or others would make things more difficult for me because it wouldn't remember my, like, you know, it wouldn't remember the cookies. It wouldn't enable me to kind of get around as easily. So you're saying that that's not the case. That
Not at all.
That wouldn't happen. Okay, and the second question, that's very good to know.
Well, I should point out, if your VPN's out of country and you want to watch a YouTube video that's only available in America, you won't be able to.
Okay.
If your VPN's in England and the Olympics are on, though.
Oh, very
Yep.
interesting.
Not that I'm
Given that we
suggesting-
are no longer Comcast family, that actually is very good to know for next month. Because I don't know how my daughters are going to watch the Olympics otherwise. Okay, so here's my next question, though. So to me, this VPN stuff has always meant that you kind of really have to presume a lot of trust in the VPN, right? I mean, and especially if they're in other countries and you don't know necessarily who could at some point seize control of what's in that. So how do we have any kind of feeling of trust or security around those VPNs?
So as I said, I use the one that we set up here at work. That is a big and really important question / statement. Just like when you're using a wireless hotspot at a coffee shop, even if you're secure with that wireless hotspot, it's still watching all your traffic. Choosing a VPN is like choosing a barber. It's really important. I know I've made that mistake badly recently, as you can all see. It's a vital, like it is a really important thing to do. And so I'll be more than happy afterwards. There are a lot of people in the circumvention tech space who keep giving me recommendations. So I have this like kind of ephemeral list, and I'd be more than happy to kind of like actually start marking down some of the VPNs that people trust and why they trust them. There are definitely a lot of companies where you just have to know about them, kind of do an audit of who they are, what they believe in, what they're saying. But it is a funnel for all your data. The best way to get a person, like everything that you do, is to be your VPN, because all of a sudden all your traffic, no matter where you are in the world, will go through them. That's an incredibly important point. Thank you.
So to say that in a shorter version, it's a social decision, right? Like it's people you trust. So it's actually, I mean, there's some of it that's technical, but some of it is actually a social decision.
Wait, people? Or just
People.
computers?
No.
Yeah, no, it is very much so a social decision. Oh, sorry, yeah. No.
Very, very quickly, and I'm sorry because I missed the beginning. But so the benefit of a VPN is it gives you the pseudo anonymity. You're coming from Iceland. But if I'm not using that and I'm just using the New America server, whatever, can the outsiders tell my distinct identity? Because it kind of sounded like the footprint of my specific laptop stops at my hotspot.
So it depends on how the router works. Does New America do natting, guys? Do we know? They do? Yeah. So at New America, they use this thing called natural address translation, or natting, which means all the traffic at New America comes from one address to the internet as a whole. Your coffee shop may give you a specific address, a specific IP address that it shouts to the internet. But here at New America specifically, no, it has one common kind of pool of addresses for everybody. Which is, if we find that address, we should look at Wikipedia for that address and see all the edits people made inside the office. That's a fun task for another day. What? It'd be fun. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please.
Is there, I mean, because I think, like, I know that I could turn to you guys in the office and say, like, what's a good VPN? But in general, people would not probably have that resource. Where could people look for this social capital?
I found my first VPN by reading a bunch of blog posts about bad VPNs. I literally searched for like what VPN not to use, and like just searched for a couple hours and found a bunch that were like, these ones are horrible, these ones are horrible, and like made my Venn diagram and found the one that was outside, like the example they used over and over again. These days, as I said, I use the work one, but and also anyone in New America, you feel free to come upstairs to our offices, and I'll be more than happy to help you find one after today, because I'm going to do my list today. But the best resource.
Oh, you're really just like.
Segue.
Okay, so I was going to say that I don't know if they've kept it up to date, but there's a blog called Torrent Freak that follows like the BitTorrent community, and they of course care a lot about VPNs and about privacy. And so they, at least a couple of times, have posted kind of a cross section of a number of commercial VPN providers.
They are commercial, obviously, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's no government that runs a VPN.
Well, I mean, like governments have VPNs for their employees the same way that like we set up a VPN for like OTI to use for stuff, but it wasn't like, so there are lots of VPNs, but there are commercial VPN services that you can buy service from if you don't have like, if for whatever reason you don't have or don't want to use like your company's VPN or the VPN that your friend set up somewhere or whatever. I don't know if they kept it up to date, but that was a good list.
Greta, Jordan, Georgia, Griffin. If you could pass that mic back.
So just keeping in mind, like, Sita's paper about people using public libraries and the advice from the FTC that those people should use VPNs. And I think everybody except one person that was polled on the library steps said that they had no idea what a VPN was. I mean, as a policy issue, where would people be able to look for that information? Because I really doubt they're going to read a bunch of blogs.
Jordan, then Georgia. Oh, but the hands were raised.
So the one thing I was going to say is I think most people's introduction to a VPN is through, like, if they have a job where they're, so this is something that is actually a valid, like, educational point that has not been explored that much, and that's sort of what Greta's talking about. It's also really common that universities have them set up, mostly for employees, but if you've ever been affiliated with one, you can usually keep your account with that university and use that. So, like, I regularly use my grad school's VPN or OTIs. But and then like I would use, when I used to work for an evil company, I didn't like using their VPN because it also meant that we were restricted in what we could do when we were connected to it. But they would actually set it up, and a lot of corporations do this, where if they provide you with a laptop, you can only use that VPN connection to even get to the internet. So it's a very common thing that people actually have really restricted hardware within corporations and can only connect via that commercial VPN that is controlled by their employer. So it's actually like it's a big way of how people experience the internet and don't always know.
So that's different than, so I was that virtual private network. Literally, it's that. So I mean, this is just showing my ignorance here, right? But VPN, when I think about it through like my husband's company or whatever, when he had always logged into his VPN, I thought of it as a virtual private network. Basically, just I don't know why I put the word virtual in there, but basically that's what I was thinking it was for his company. I wasn't imagining it as a kind of a proxy network to be able to kind of mask where you came from, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, he's literally inside the building on the internet when he uses that VPN. The signal is coming from inside the house. So like when I use ours here at the office, I am coming from our server upstairs. When I use the internet, I get one of our IP addresses. Everything is happening as if I'm in this network, this private network, virtually. Jordan, you still got anything to say? Or you're good? Griffin, did you want to?
If you're coming outside looking in and you're trying to find a VPN, one good thing to do is actually go to like technology nonprofits online. Sometimes they actually have recommendations, but there are also groups like Rise Up or May 1st. The VPN that I use is from an organization called Autistici, which is basically the Italian Rise Up, and they do a lot of tech activism around the world and offer free VPNs to people who are involved in that. But to go back to Josh's recommendation, I've actually used some of the VPNs that were listed on Torrent Freak, and they go through every year and say, okay, well, what are the most popular VPNs? And then they go through and really dissect their privacy policy, and they ask them additional questions and see where they stand on user privacy, and if they're secretly selling the data or something like that, it tends to come out.
But just to return to the question of policy for a second, is it just me, or does this seem like an area that's really ripe for someone like us to do something about, like how people who have to use public internet connections can find VPNs? Okay.
It's not just you.
It's not.
There's a guy named Jabari, I can't remember his last name. He does a series of courses called Encrypt the Hood The idea being, I know it's adorable, but they're really cheap and they're offered, I think, at the Georgia Avenue Economic Development Center's offices. The idea being that they're getting to folks that are marginalized to let them know that they need this as well, and here's why. So,
awesome. So, here is that same, and again, this is all the same examples. You can see a lot of the same text here. But that first communication is slightly different because your first set of traffic is actually encrypted to this VPN provider. So you and your laptop and the ISP have this packet that gets sent saying, VPN provider, here's this data I want. ISP, please send me to the VPN provider. And the difference here is that when the VPN provider receives this packet, it then resends it. I am an English-speaking Mac user running Chrome. Can I have your site? But with its address as opposed to yours. Now, mind you, inside that packet is still your user login, your name, your email you're sending. But the communication between New America and the VPN provider is unique in that it sends its own address. So for when you're viewing the internet that's not loginable, when you're reading blogs, possibly not doing Google searches, it becomes much more secure and kind of anonymizing than otherwise. Also, I'll point out the really cute animations I have on the router hotspot, just while we're here.
Understand, and then maybe this also goes to some of the policy stuff you're talking about, Greta, in terms of what kind of advice. Even right now, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, wait a second. All right, HTTPS everywhere. I need to figure that part out. Then there's this other thing, this VPN thing, and I should kind of make sure I'm finding a trusted one, and here's some places to go, and I got to make sure that the places I go to find a trusted one are trusted places to go, and I got to find friends I trust to tell me about the trusted places to find out about the. But back to the HTTPS part, like, what if just more people were getting smart about HTTPS in the first place? Do we still need to be thinking about this VPN part?
So what HTTPS does is it creates a secure connection for your data. Essentially a secure system. I mean, it wraps your data in an envelope. But the front of that envelope still says your name and your address. The VPN is essentially sending it to a remailer in the old-fashioned way. And then post-VPN, there's like the uber cool VPN that all the hip geeks use. And it's called Tor. And it consists of a VPN with a bunch of different layers, which is why it's like a parfait, because of the layers. Or an onion, but that's the easy joke, because that's their logo. So unlike the VPN, which, as we saw before, wraps our HTTPS traffic, which we're using now, right, in a wrapper, what Tor does is it actually wraps it in 3 different wrappers. And more than that, those 3 wrappers are the 3 different onions on the internet. And I'm going to kind of briefly explain why this is so cool. Because what they do is you make your first wrapper, your first bit of data, and on that envelope you say, I want to write a letter to the green computer from the white onion, and you address it to the orange onion. Then you go take that, shove it in another envelope and say, white onion, I have a message from green onion to orange onion. And you shove it in an envelope. And then to the green onion you say, green onion, please connect me to white onion. What happens at the end is the green onion gets this envelope from you, it knows who you are, and it says, oh, this is for the white onion. And so it unencrypts this and says, oh, a letter for white onion, and sends it to white onion. So the green onion knows who you are and who the second device is. The second device, though, now receives an envelope that says, I have a letter to orange onion from green onion. It says nothing about you. This middle onion, this white onion here, has no idea who you are or who's getting this package. Nor does green onion know who's getting the package or who the third device is. All of a sudden, we've created this completely unknowing party here who just knows that somewhere in this network of different proxies, network of VPNs, that these 2 other VPNs sent me a letter. And it's totally encrypted, and I have no idea where it's going or what it's doing, except for this orange guy and this green guy here. And when he sends it to Orange Onion, who unencrypts his little chunk, because you've encrypted it to each individual person in these layers, you're wrapping these layers of encrypted data, the final onion opens this up and goes, oh, hey, White Onion wants to talk to this green laptop. He has no idea who Green Onion was. He has no idea who you were. All he knows is the endpoint. And then right here is the Wild West of the internet. Unless you're using HTTPS or some other fun tool, this is just using the internet. And because we're using this Tor crazy proxy system, you're using the internet somewhere in the world. Probably Europe, because a ton of these guys in Europe. You'll pop out and turn on Google, and it'll say like something in French or Russian if you're in Russia, or Spanish in Brazil, or upside down in Australia. And it just throws you out into the wild internet, and your data is sent from there. So just like a VPN has you spouting your data out from that endpoint, Tor does the same thing, but it bounces you around so much, and every time you turn it on, it gets you to a different endpoint. So what ends up actually happening is you no longer have that, oh, well, they're connecting to this VPN every day, and then this traffic's coming out of that VPN, and over a period of days, it's a lot easier to find out who you are, or at least where you're coming from. Tor is a tool used by activists all over the world, and other people who care about their identity and not having it associated with their traffic, that allows you to pretend you're somewhere else in the world. It also allows you to get around blocks like I can't watch the Olympics, or my government is filtering my blog, and the like. And so it very deeply removes you from your local, kind of place, your local place in the world. Now, mind you, there's a ton of context around how it's secure. And I'm not going to say that Tor is fully secure. In fact, there's no tool on the internet or in the world that is fully secure for any use case. And I think I've kept you guys a long time, and I'd love to do a deep dive into Tor at some other point where we can actually really talk about why Tor is cool, and like what we can do with Tor. But I want to allow for, so much for my last slide. Allow for, it had me and it was pretty, had a beard. So I want to give an opportunity for questions here at the end. And if you guys would like, we can do another session that goes really deep into Tor, but I'd love questions about Tor now as well. Josh?
I just wanted to raise 2 points about Tor quickly. One is that that it's a tool that gets around the how do you trust your VPN provider, because they have, like, they're the only ones who know who you are kind of thing, because Tor doesn't know who you are. Like, the first Tor router knows who you are but doesn't know what you're doing, and none of the others know who you are. So, and that set of 3 is random every single time that you connect to the network. So it gets around, like, Tor doesn't know who you are or what you're doing, and there's no central control of the Tor network, really. So it gets around the how do you trust your VPN provider problem.
And also, if you really want slow data, you can use multiple, like you can use more than 3 onions in your Tor connection, but you'll never watch YouTube again.
The second point I wanted to mention is that although there is no secure tool, like you said, and same is true for Tor, and there are a lot of trade-offs with Tor, and also, like, that last hop is through the open internet, and it's still, like, your data. So if you are, if you use Tor to log into Google, like, Google still knows that you logged in. It still knows that it's you, and so that's, like, you can still share identifying information over a Tor connection. However, like, Tor is pretty notable lately in that there was a leaked memo from the NSA that this is basically, like, they can't break it or have not been successful in breaking it as far as anyone knows. That the best that they could do was, like, exploit a problem in the version of Firefox that was distributed with the Tor browser. And it was an old version. So that was, like, the best that they could do. So it is notable that the NSA hates Tor.
Yeah, it's the best we have.
Yeah.
Greta behind you.
Oh, everywhere. How you doing, Seamus? Good. Cool. So this has been so helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I've really learned so much. Yeah. For me, although Tor is interesting, what I would love next time is a greater understanding of, like, what that traffic looks like and how it's exploitable, like what are the harms. And I think, again, thinking in a sort of policy and field context, that's the information that will be like super helpful for me in talking to people about their privacy and their behavior online.
Rock on. Cool. If there are no more, no need to be quick. This is what we're here for.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's totally awesome.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I hope you do so much. Yeah. I say that understanding about 5% of it, but I'm going to watch it later.
So I failed then.
So quick question though, like I am, let's say I'm not that concerned if the NSA is reading everything. I'm not that worried about government surveillance. I'm more worried about third parties like companies, hackers, whatever. I'm just wondering, all this stuff you're talking about is the primary reason to avoid government surveillance, or are there other reasons you'd want to use it as well?
Do those third parties include the companies that you have subscriptions with, like Google and Yahoo and YouTube and?
No, I'm more worried about, like, as a journalist, like companies I'm writing about hacking into my stuff to know what I'm doing, or third-party people who really hate what I'm saying, hacking in and disrupting or figuring out what I'm doing, that kind of thing.
Then you can stop probably before Tor. I would still suggest a VPN. I definitely would use HTTPS. Being hacked is a lot about strong passwords. And I know we do security talks as well. OTI has done a couple of these NAF-wide. We'd be more than happy to do more. Actually, that gentleman sitting next to you is the guy who runs the security talks. So a lot of that is about kind of individual security, strong password use, the way that you handle your emails and how you log into certain things and what you click on and what you download. But a lot of this is more about, as you were saying, what is being passed over the wire. And so a lot of it is, what does that router see, that hotspot, and everyone who's in that cafe with you if you're not using some sort of secured connection, as well as what can anyone see along those wires, which would be governments. So if you were worried about a government when you went to some other country and were doing a story, then all of a sudden these tools become much more valuable. And this is actually not stolen, I wrote it, but it is converted from a talk I did for journalists where that is countries are more focused on as the possible people who want to see your data.
I just have one quick question. I know at the very beginning you were talking about the difference between WEP and WPA. For personal home use, I'm assuming that when you purchase a router from a provider like Comcast or someone like that, that is...
It's on the box.
Okay.
It'll be like WPA security with such and such bandwidth usage, but it'll say one of those three letters.
And so then your like first step, and then from there you use HTTP or HTTPS and then a VPN.
Yeah, if you're buying a router for your house, make sure it has WPA and turn it on. Also, make sure you change the default passwords, not only on the WPA access point, but also the router has a password to get in. And I can't tell you how often I've moved in with new roommates and been like, what's the password to the router? I don't know. And been like, admin. And all of a sudden, here I am in my home router and can change all the passwords. And I mean, I'm a wireless geek, so it's great. Because I'm like, I'm actually going to modify some settings here. This is horrible. And load open source software on this device. It's great for me. But it's also great for any other person who might want full, because if you can get into the router itself, not the access point password, but the router password, which rarely is changed, you can then just say, also make sure you send all the traffic that goes to this router to this address as well, just to mirror it so that I know what's going on in this household. So that's what I would do, is the first thing is get a router that has WPA at your home, and then change those two passwords to something strong and awesome. It doesn't have to be awesome, but I find they're easier to remember if they're awesome. Yeah, lots of threes in it though.
And if you're connecting to something, a wireless point, it should say that. Like, you can get that information without logging into it, right?
Yeah, your phone,
there's like a display information. It'll be like, it'll say what it's using also. Even if it's not physically your router, it'll say which of those two tools it's using.
So your devices know, and so you can actually like pick and choose based off that.
Just kind of curious if anyone knows what Amtrak's, is it WPA, WEP?
Yeah, I don't think it uses that. It uses a login screen, like a portal, but I don't believe, and I can check right here, I don't believe that it actually uses any sort of security. When I'm on Amtrak, I use my VPN here at work, so that connection is secured.
Nobody knows you're traveling.
Well, I mean, whether or not they know that I'm there, they can't read what I'm sending because it's secured to work. and then I'm using work's internet.
So who watches Amtrak's traffic? Like, I mean, I'm just
not me, but anyone who's on Amtrak who wants to.
Yeah, anyone who's on your train can sniff all of your traffic.
So don't do my bills while I'm going up to New York on Thursday.
Or send any emails. So of course the old NSA director got in a conversation with a bunch of journalists about the leaks on Amtrak, so don't do that either. But yeah, I mean, you're basically shouting everything when you use wireless.
So is this a public policy issue that any publicly funded transportation system like Amtrak should be using WPA at least?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, you know, from my perspective.
I would also like that if any publicly funded Wi-Fi was not actually back sponsored by a company, we could do that too. Because I mean, like in New York, all the public hotspots are actually like you get 30 minutes free, and it's run by a company. So on top of the fact that the security's not there, there's like multiple layers of. Yeah, that's a good public policy conversation on multiple levels.
Whether it's encrypted or not in some way is the question. Yeah. Okay.
Griffin?
I'd also like to point out that most public transit systems, and most anywhere you go that's just public, free, or included Wi-Fi is filtered. On Amtrak, you actually can't go to, if you wanted to download Tor while you were on the train, you can't do it because it's something that will get around their filter, so they block it by default, even though it's a nonprofit company. So just be aware of that. Yeah.
So I've been using Wi-Fi now on Amtrak, but I need to look and see whether it's.
Totally different topic. Remember the scandal with the Green Party politician in Germany who, was that was about his cell phone pinging towers, right? And so he requested that information from the cell phone company.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing you were talking about with the.
Well, kind of. So the same way we do it with hotspots, we also, cell phones do that by default because that's how you get your calls. That's why you don't have dropped calls and stuff all the time, is because cell phones can find you and then go, oh, he's leaving my area. Does anyone else got him? And so they triangulate you. So there's always 3 towers who know where you are or more. So what I was talking about in the first bit with the MAC address, cell phones actually use their own addressing scheme that identifies your phone, so they can bill you and track you and make sure you get good calls. The MAC address is just the Wi-Fi. So it's just your wireless device. The cell phone signal is actually a bigger bubble surrounding your Wi-Fi bubble. So your Wi-Fi bubble is this kind of, not small, it's 150 feet or not. And then there's this giant cell tower. I don't know what the radio cool bubble looks like for cell signals, but I'm assuming it's something like that as well that surrounds it. Nat?
Just to add to the thing about the phone and what your phone is beaconing, one of the things to remember, though, about smartphones is when you register, say, your Android phone with the market, they're associating that with your Google ID, which they're using to track you around the internet. But Android phones also store that information along with your MAC address and send that along with hotspots you connect to back to Google. So that information is being broadcast from your smartphone, just it's not being beaconed out via the wireless signal. It's being surreptitiously sent to Google through other internet channels when it gets the chance, opportunistically.
Yeah, so all your apps have their own data paths. When we said, though, connecting to the website over HTTPS, your Twitter client may not use HTTPS. Your phone, as it was collecting your geographic data and where you are and what you're doing for Google, may not use HTTPS. Your insert any app here, X, Y, or Z, may not be using secure communication. And just like your traffic here is using your internet connection to finish those calls. And some of it may be over your 3G link to the cell tower, but some of it also may be over Wi-Fi.
Around encrypting access points, especially public access points, it's too complicated, I think, to get into here, but I just wanted to touch on that there's a broader question of that's not just about every access point should be encrypted and locked down and everything. It's more about being aware of the level of security that you have, because I think that there are definitely strong negative usability things for locking down public Wi-Fi. There are very good reasons that most public Wi-Fi things are open, and it's to make it as easy as possible for as many people as possible to connect to. And that doesn't mean that things like SSL and other stuff aren't still in effect to protect your connection to a certain extent with your email server and things like that. And that furthermore, there's like some interest in making it easier for people to share their wireless access through like having their access point provide one network that's secure for their own traffic that's separate from an unencrypted network that is, has some portion of unused bandwidth and is open for other people to use that isn't without some concerns because of some of the reasons that were cited around like whether if someone used that for illicit traffic, if that could be tracked back to you, but that has potentially broad like public benefits. And so just sort of touching on the fact that there's a broader conversation about that, and it's not just like walk down absolutely everything.
The Open Wireless Movement's website, and I think it's openwirelessmovement.net, is a great place to get a little bit of information about exactly what Josh is saying here, which is the dramatic impact that having a bunch of closed down wireless access points all over the place can do for connectivity for people who possibly can't afford it at their own home, or when you're walking your dog, or the like. Also, I hear mesh networks are great at providing local connectivity in these kinds of situations. Is that it? Yes. Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Yay.